Costini here with a discussion about the Ogre Kingdoms and Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and why they should be reworked by Creative Assembly and how they should be reworked by CA. Because the Ogre Kingdoms are one of the worst races in the game at the moment. Now, they shouldn't be. They actually have a pretty good unit roster, if only you could have access to it. They have some good hero options, if only you had access to them. Their lords and legendary lords aren't necessarily the great. Well, Scrag is okay. Greases, however, is pretty damn terrible unless you're using mods. And I never take the view, oh, mods will fix it. No. If there's an issue in a race and a faction, mods can help out to make them playable, but they're still utter rubbish. And to be clear, this is a modded campaign that I'm playing right here. Well, mods in terms of, for instance, unit upgrades as an example, banner out-resolve, all that kind of stuff. But there are still major issues even with mods in an Ogre campaign. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about settlements. The Ogres can only hold settlements up to tier 3. Now there's a lot of issues with respect to this. It means your economy is limited. It means your unit recruitment is limited. It means the only hero capacity you can increase through regular settlements is hunters. And while hunters certainly are good because they give you mobility and growth, they aren't really that great when it comes to combat. At least until they unlock their mount option. Then things do change up quite significantly when it comes to their combat potential. The economy of these settlements is also pretty pathetic, with the main economic building going only up to 150. Now, to be fair, at least they are cheap to build initially, but they are still pretty limited. And 1,000 for 150 income, I mean, it is better than what some other factions do have, but it's still not necessarily all that great. One particular annoying thing about this is that the amount of meat that the settlements do generate isn't necessarily the best in the world either. But what's also frustrating when you're looking at these particular settlements is that at tier 1, they're generating the same growth as at tier 3. So you can't even grow them very quickly because you don't gain a growth benefit. I mean, there is a growth structure. To be clear, there's actually 2 growth structures, but it's still pretty annoying. They're difficult to defend, and you're not really gaining that much leverage, except trade resources and, of course, unit recruitment for Ogre Bulls, Iron Guts, and Saber Tusks. And then Gorgers. Gorgers are actually the best early game unit. In fact, maybe a strategy in an Ogre campaign is to try and get Gorgers as quickly as possible. But the problem is, because your economy is so weak, you really won't be able to maintain a lot of them. Yes, even as Greases with raiding cafe and caravans. Having an economy just purely based on raiding and looting and sacking isn't a great option. What makes a great economy is being able to benefit from that, to be sure, but having such a good baseline economy that it will work in its own right. This is the difference between the Ogres and the Greenskins, because while the Greenskins absolutely do depend on looting and sacking and raiding, their baseline economic structure just generates significantly more money than what the Ogres are able to do in their campaign. And money is power. It's armies, it's heroes, it's lords. It's everything in a campaign that matters. It's being able to afford an army like this, for instance. And by the way, this is a pretty damn expensive army when we're thinking about it. And the units here are either tier 2 or tier 3. The costs of Ogre armies are actually quite very high when you start really looking into things. The actual upkeep costs of the Ogre units themselves, unless they're in a camp. Paired out to the weak economy, you get a fairly limited campaign. Okay, but what about the camps that do give you income, that do give you unit recruitment, that do give you hero capacity? Well, here's the thing. The camps are in themselves fairly limited. They're very difficult to defend. If you're ending up in a situation where you have to defend a camp, never fight for the camp itself. The reason is the layout of the camp is terrible. The camp leader is not like a Black Ark Lord, because the Black Ark Lord has an entire skill line, and the Black Ark itself can move, so it can be defended. The camp cannot be moved, and the camp tyrant is just no-name Lord. He can't be leveled up, he can't get the skill lines. You can have a high-tier army, and it will be pretty pathetic. If any of your camps is under threat, it is just much better to recruit an emergency lord and move whatever units you have from within the camp, outside of the camp, to fight a field battle to try and defend it. That will generally end up working significantly better. But camps are certainly very vulnerable. And also they're a nightmare to get to a high level in a campaign. Like, consider this. Consider this in this particular campaign. I have a tier 3 camp. I have the growth building for the camp itself. Over here in the campaign, there is no other growth building for the camp. So right now, at the maximum level of growth I can get for the camp, it is going to take me until turn 32 to get it to tier 4. Actually, no, it's going to take until turn 37 to get it to tier 4, because I still also have to wait for the thing to actually be built. And that is a problem, because until I get to that point, I can't get fire bellies, and I will have a lot of issues in terms of just the camp potential. I mean, the surplus points you're gaining in a camp, by the way, need to be used for other structures as well. You want to get some decent level of income? Well, you need to build, you need to spend surplus points for that. Oh, you want to get, for instance, you want to get the butchers, you need to spend the surplus point. Everything requires a surplus point, at least initially. And surplus points, you will probably end up getting one per turn in a camp pretty quickly, but it is going to end up being a problem when you're having to spend it on different structures. Now, this is certainly an issue Black Arks do have, sure, but one, Black Arks can get extra growth through research beyond just building a building in the camp or in the Black Ark. And two, you don't need a Black Ark for your main economic building. Whereas for ogres, the main economic building is in the actual camp. Like, camps are so important for our economy because they buff the income from all non-camp buildings faction-wide. So the more territory you hold, the more camps you hold, the more income you're gonna get. Sure, so if you get a ridiculous level of camps, you'll be generating a significant amount of money, but you would need a ridiculous level of camps at the pretty high level in order to generate that income. And it's not like the Beastmen. Like, look at the Beastmen situation with hordes. Like, you can get extra surplus points with the ogre camps with research, but you can't get camps. I think you cannot get camps at a higher level. At least I'm not seeing any particular research that would allow you to do that. Rather, what you can do is just get higher. You can just start camps with quite a lot more surplus points from the beginning, but you still have to wait for the things to be built at a higher possible level. Like we've seen with Black Ark Corsairs or with Horde armies, how you can do this better than with the damn camp system, because that's what really the camp should be. They should be either a Black Ark or they should be counted as a Horde army, but they're not either of those really. And this means that your economy is going to be limited in a campaign, because your main economic potential is from the camps, but the camps are limited in number. Like, if we look at the research situation, you can only get 4 camps in a campaign until you get to the Sky Titans plateau. I mean, you could technically get 5 if you get the bigger tents, but that just means it's going to take longer to get to the Sky Titans plateau. So you end up in this kind of situation where it takes up to 80 turns in order to get that unlimited camp number. So until you get to that point, all you're going to get at most in a campaign, actually just looking at the situation, you're only going to have, in any ogre campaign, you're only going to have 2 provincial capitals until turn 40. That is absurd. Unless you're playing Greases, in which case you get free, which I already have built over here. So I have free camps. That is all. Free for provincial capitals in a campaign for 40 turns is a pathetic number. That's what really camps are. They're provincial capitals that you station wherever you want. Now, there's another issue with this, beyond the fact that this is incredibly limiting. It's limiting in the sense that you won't be able to get as many heroes in an Ogre campaign, especially not the replenishment heroes like the Butchers. You won't be able to get as many Firebellies or Butchers in a campaign. You won't be able to recruit as many good units in a campaign. You won't be able to maintain as many armies in a campaign as other races do. So your campaign ends up being far more limited. But even worse in an Ogre campaign is the meat aspect. See, you will generally not generate enough meat through battles in order to keep a full stack going, because a full stack of units requires 20 meat per turn. You can get 10 from buildings in a province, right? You can increase it even further, sure. Let's say we get the larder, which destroys your income in the local region. Yeah, that's great. Let's completely screw over the pitiful income that ogres already have. Let's just go down 50% in terms of our income. That's a brilliant decision right there. Just to not even gain meat per turn, just to get it to a flat level, so we're at full stack is gaining as much meat as it's consuming every single turn. That's great. A camp will generate meat, but the thing is, the camp itself is just not going to generate. The camp itself cannot be moved, and your armies do need to move, because being an aggressive expansionist is absolutely the way to go in Warhammer 3. Some people would argue, oh, you can just play a defensive campaign as ogres. That is the dumbest thing you could do in any campaign in general. Playing defensively just means the AI is going to run in circles around you and annihilate you. Look at Greases' situation. You've got Gorse to the south, Drazov to the west, Emmerich and Tretch further to the west, Xiao Ming to the east, Grimgor to the north. Do you think this is the kind of campaign where you can just sit on your ass and let them come to you? I mean, if you want to enjoy the prospect of seeing Grimgor show up with 5 full stacks at your territory because you've decided to play defensively, especially on Legendary, go right ahead. Do that. You will get wiped out, and you deserve to be wiped out if you're engaging in such a foolish plan. No, it doesn't work. But the problem is, while you certainly have the ability with the army to be aggressively, though there's issues with that as well. Let's be clear with respect to it. While you can have the army possibly to be aggressive, the problem is you're going to run out of meat. So you're going to have a situation like this army right here is running out of meat. I'm going to probably have to move it over here to the Sentinels camp just to get its meat production back in order. Or I can hope it doesn't run out of meat by the time I can get Tribal Gathering, so I can put another camp down and then generate meat for those armies. So quite a lot of problems with respect to that. And furthermore, let's talk about the unit roster, because you might think, oh, ogres at least have a good unit roster. They do, but the problem is you're generally not going to see the actual good units. So because you have a limited economy, you can't afford things like man-eaters or Mornfag cavalry, scrap launchers and lead belchers, and those are just tier 3 units. Let's not even talk about things like tier 4 or tier 5. There's some really cool stuff over here. Iron blasters, for instance, crushers, man-eaters with gray weapons. There's some really, really cool stuff in here, but it is ridiculously expensive. You're looking at 300, 350, 500 income per turn. You cannot afford an army with these units in them. Just flat out cannot afford to do so. If you try, you will go bankrupt really, really quickly. What really you're going to use in most ogre campaigns, in the vast majority of the campaigns you play as the ogres, you're going to get ogre bulls, then you're going to get the variants of ogre bulls, which, by the way, it kind of sucks that, the unit roster that you have until tier 3 is basically like just ogre bulls and variants, which are not that great either, because the problem is they have poor armor piercing. And having poor armor piercing means, okay, you can win battles because of the major charge bonus you have in battles and the mass you have, especially if you're using meat. Great stuff there. You can certainly win battles, but when you come up against a foe that's heavily armored, you're going to get screwed over. And this lasts until tier 3. because you have no unit with good armor piercing until tier 3. And then you get into the situation of Gorgers and Iron Guts, which are significantly more expensive than Ogre Bulls, and that's a problem when you have a limited economy. But hey, at least they have good armor piercing. See, the problem is, they might have good armor piercing, but because you have such a limited economy, how many of these do you think you'll be able to afford? You will obviously afford the full stack of Iron Guts with Greases, because he does have that major upkeep benefit for them. That's unless you end up having to fight Gorst. And fun fact about fighting Gorst, his zombies might be able to defeat your Iron Guts army. Yeah, that's the problem in an Ogre campaign. Gorgers can do pretty well, though, in a campaign as Scrag, but they require tier 3 in order to get. Now, Gorgers are, however, really, really good in battle. They have good armor piercing, bonus to versus infantry. They don't have the same armor as Iron Guts, but they are actually pretty damn significant in their own way in a battle. But still, issues there as well because of their low level of armor. So you end up having significant issues in terms of accessing good Ogre armies. Outside of that, all you have are Gnoblars and Ogre Bulls, and quite frankly, they're pretty crap, a lot of them. Like, if you're fighting against Ogres, like, Gnoblars and Ogre Bulls are not really going to be able to stand up to you. I mean, unless you let the Ogres charge again against you, sure. But in a straight-up fight, they will lose because they're pretty vulnerable to ranged attacks in a campaign. They're vulnerable to large attacks. They don't have the best armor, and because of their lack of armor piercing, they're actually going to struggle to kill a lot of things. Like, as an example, over here I've basically defeated Tretch, but fun fact, actually killing any of Tretch's lords in battle was actually pretty difficult in this campaign, because I could wipe out his entire army, no problem with just cycle charging, but actually wiping out his lords or some of his heavily armored units like Warp Grinders and Rallying Gunners over here, that was a bit more tricky. Because I just didn't have the damage with the Ogre Bulls that I had in this army until I upgraded them with a mod to Iron Guts. And there's the issue. The damage potential just isn't there until you get to tier 3 at the very least. And even when you do get to tier 3, you're just not going to be able to afford those units. So, problem after problem after problem in a campaign. And both Greases and Scrag start in pretty terrible starting positions where they're very exposed to a lot of enemies. Like, Scrag is exposed to Belegar, he's exposed to Gelt, he's exposed to the Greenskins, to Wurzag, and a lot of factions he's got around him are far more powerful than him. Then you look at poor Greases, he's got Grimgor, Gorst, Xiao Ming, Drazov, Emmerich, and Tretch around him, and all of them, to a degree or another, may hate him. I mean, this campaign that I'm showing you here, it's actually like the best case scenario where I have an alliance with Gorst. I've been able to maintain good enough relations with Xiao Ming and Grimgor to not end up in a war with them, and I've wiped out Drazov. But this is like the best case scenario that you could possibly get in a campaign, by far and away. I mean, minus the fact that I've screwed over myself here in the short term. But if there's any tip on that, don't try and make an alliance with the Thunderguts unless you're willing to fight Emmerich, which I was not at that point, so I kind of ended up screwing myself over doing so. But still, plenty of issues to deal with in an Ogre campaign. I would say that camps need to grow faster, and you need to have a lot more of them, or they need to be attached to armies, at least the Legendary Lord army, and you should start with a camp. On top of that, like, just the growth of settlements should be better. Like, if Creative Assembly doesn't want to give the Ogres full proper settlements, okay. I think it is silly, but I also think, like, the economy of these settlements, these minor settlements, should be significantly better than it currently is. Like, you could easily double the income here, or triple it, really, yes, the base economic building. You could triple it, and the Ogre still would actually be in some fairly limit, and would still have severe limits in our campaign. But we do need more camps, and we also need to be able to move the camps. But even if we were able to move the camps, they would still be fairly vulnerable. So the Ogres really need to work better in terms of increasing their hero capacity, getting access to good units, having an economy outside of the very, very limited number of camps in a campaign that they have. And it's a camp. It should be movable. Just tonight, like, that's the frustrating thing. It's literally called a camp. It should be movable. It is not. That's the silly aspect about it. Like, we have horde armies that are movable. We have black arcs that are movable, but we can't move a damn camp. That's the ridiculous aspect about all of it. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.